Today, I'd like to welcome you back. I'm going to be interviewing one of our therapists who help facilitate our EMS weekends. If you've watched probably 2 or 3 videos of mine, you know that we talk a lot about the EMS weekend and what happens at the EMS weekend. We've had several therapists come in who really understand the world of infidelity. There's certainly no difference with Leigh, who has her own practice here in Austin, Texas, and helps facilitate our EMS weekends. My hope today is that you get to know one of our therapists who is at our weekends, and you understand more about a very sensitive, very necessary discussion that we're going to have today. Hi, Leigh.
Hi.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Today we're going to talk about, I think, probably one of the most sensitive discussions that the betrayed spouse kind of has to face. And the unfaithful spouse kind of throws out this, I guess, tagline or label. And there's so many armchair therapists who like to kind of talk about what we're going to talk about today, and that's codependency. And when you're dealing with infidelity, there's several therapists who very kind of flippantly will just say, well, you're just being codependent. I have talked to probably thousands of betrayed spouses who were incredibly wounded at being mislabeled or mishandled even, and just being told that they were codependent. Sometimes by therapists that come from faith, or even just well-meaning, authority figures. And then there's people that don't come from faith that just throw out that concept. And it really can be hurtful. So as an expert, someone who walks couples through recovery from infidelity, how do you define, what do you feel like is a great definition of codependency?
Well, thanks for the question and the topic at large, because I agree with you. A lot of people do throw out that label and even receive that label kind of flippantly. And it means that it's another form of blaming the victim in a sense. We don't want to victimize anybody. We don't want to shame anyone. Right. A succinct definition, I hope, is codependency is an attempt to regulate one's own emotions through the actions or behavior of somebody else. While loving someone, that's what we often feel it is, right? This genuine care and concern, that can move into control. It doesn't feel like control, it feels like love. It feels like care, it feels like efforts to protect, but it ends up being more controlling, which then inadvertently can produce shame or defense in the other party. So attachment then in that relationship broadens, heightening more a greater sense of alarm in the couple.
When you are helping a betrayed spouse kind of navigate through their own recovery, it's inevitable that I think a lot of them, and I certainly wouldn't say all, but a lot of the community of betrayed spouses, whether it be male or female, is faced with the situation where maybe the unfaithful is not doing a lot, and they're maybe they're ambivalent, back and forth, resistant, lazy, all the things that Samantha said I was at one time. In that moment, I think betrayeds are forced to say, am I being codependent? Maybe I am. And then there's more, right? Now we've unlocked a whole massive amount of vault of stuff to work through. Help the betrayed spouse. If they're struggling to answer that question, how can they say, yeah, you're being codependent when you're displaying codependent nuances when you are doing these things. And while this isn't an exhaustive list, it would take hours to do that. What are some of the big ones to help our betrayed spouses kind of work through that?
Yeah. Well, I'd say over-caring, over-compensating, all the overs kind of come to mind. Over-controlling, over-complying. It's important to recognize in these kinds of situations that you're going to have a mixture. It's not going to be strictly codependent behavior, strictly loving behavior. It's a mixture. So let's first of all give ourselves a little grace and acknowledge this is multi-layered, multifaceted.
Yeah, it's a mess.
It's a mess.
We're all doing our best.
Exactly. Pat yourself on the back. You're in the fight, right? You're going for it.
Stay in the fight.
Absolutely.
Take a break, fight.
Yes.
Don't quit.
Don't quit.
But here's some help on if you're being codependent. codependent.
Yes. If you're being codependent, one of the things you want to ask yourself is, what's my motivation in doing this? Your motivation is where the codependency traits come in, or the control basically. Codependency is a kind way to say, I think to some extent, controlling behaviors. People pleasing is a form of control. If I am in a kind of victim mode and I'm demanding that you behave a certain way, that can sound like care, and it may be motivated genuinely by care for our relationship. But to the extent that it has to be, and I'm doing these tight fists on purpose because that's ultimately what it feels like in the moment, when it has to be this way, I'm no longer giving you space to make your own free choice. I'm demanding.
And those are fantastic points. How do you, and this is a tough question, so get ready.
Okay.
How do you help the betrayed spouse, though, who's dealing with the unfaithful, who's not necessarily engaged, right? And they're not really doing a lot of recovery work, and the betrayed feels like they need more. And it's kind of like, look, I need more effort out of you. So, and then they sometimes try maybe in control, or try and box them in, or try and do those things. Where do you draw the line? How do you help that betrayed navigate through that difficult scenario?
Awesome question. And that's really the meat of the matter, isn't it? So because of that, it's on an individual basis.
Right.
But generally speaking, to answer that question, that's where grief comes in. That's where self-care comes in, and acknowledging even your own sense of self-worth. We talk about at EMS Weekends, affairs being a rupture in identity, a fracture in identity. And so much of that is based on who I thought I was in this relationship, who I thought we were.
Right.
And we're kind of going back to ground zero. And so each spouse, hopefully, is working on, who am I? Right? What do I bring to the table? What are my needs, my desires? And from a place of wholeness there, I can enter and engage with my spouse. The person who's unfaithful is doing the same thing, but just that distance, which is anxiety provoking in this phase.
Absolutely.
But the distance for me to, as the betrayed, to work on those things and not pursue my partner, gives just enough space for them to decide against ambivalence that they're willing to draw near.
What does the betrayed do, right? I try and help couples so often. They're navigating through, I can't make you want me. I want to, but I'm not going to. But I am scared to death, vulnerable, lost, hurt, sad, depressed, sometimes suicidal. I mean, how does the betrayed self-soothe? I mean, how do they help themselves diffuse these nuances, these codependent traits? What do they do?
Yeah, that's really the recovery part for them, because everything from the soothing self-care to their own support network, whether it's literature, resource, their own EMS group, those kinds of processing, maybe a faith support source. But that part is where we're repairing the identity. We're addressing negative messages, things that we believed about ourselves, or things that are confronting the masks that we wore in the relationship, those kinds of things. And when you get down to the core identity, right, and you're living out of that personal truth, then you're ready to engage your partner in a different way. So to go a little bit deeper, let me just talk for a second about the kind of relational dynamics that are happening. A lot of times codependency is going on to some extent even before an affair. You'll have an under-functioning and an over-functioning partner in the relationship. The issue here is that they're not emotionally connecting. One is more distant, more absent. That could be because of work. Could be because of an addiction, whether it's alcohol, pornography, whatever. But because of that, they're not fully engaged. There's not this relational, emotional honesty happening, this dialogue happening between them, which produces anxiety when they're together. And so this one will overfunction, will pursue in the relationship, will attempt to control to bring this one back. So there's resentment that happens here, which is a big symptom, emotional symptom of codependency, that anxiousness as well as resentment. So often the betrayed is in this role, and the unfaithful here.
And that's a tough point. So with respect to the betrayed spouses, I'm going to ask you a pretty hard-hitting question that I think I always want to be honest here. I want to give people help.
Yes.
But there is some truth to the fact that when we are trying to pursue, or we're trying to maybe control our partner, and I did this a lot with Samantha, is that we just call it love. I'm just trying to engage. I'm just trying to be connected, damn it. And we're pretty aggressive, and we think we're pretty valiant, when in reality, we can be a betrayed, but also an unfaithful. But for this thread, we can be a betrayed, and we could be trying to control our spouse. Even though we may call it codependent traits, are we really deep down inside trying to control that other person? Speak to that. I think that's such a Bermuda Triangle.
It is, because what are you really going for? And this is where Sue Johnson's work comes in with that fear, that lack of attachment, right? That brings up a traumatic response in us, this fight, flight, freeze, and you're fighting for the relationship. That's the deeper level. The surface level is, I want my emotions regulated because I am super anxious about you not being available to me.
Wow, that's really good. So we, in that position, are the betrayed, trying to regulate ourselves using the unfaithful, and then the unfaithful acts like a dumbass, like I did, and then the betrayed can be sent reeling, right?
Yes, and so the crazy cycle begins in a whole new way.
What does that betrayed spouse do in that moment? When they have tried to control, and maybe for the first time they're having to have a difficult conversation with themselves, or maybe they know it, I don't know, but they've tried it, the unfaithful's doing their thing. What can that betrayed spouse do in that moment to self-soothe and to start the journey towards getting healthy and dealing with that confliction, if you will, conflicted struggle inside of them?
Well, two people in that elevated state are not going to be able to have a rational conversation. So one of them has to make the break. One of them has to pause. Let me be clear that when I say break, I mean pause. And get to a state. So that may mean a timeout. That may mean just sitting there. If you can keep your seat, so to speak, and breathe, begin to think, then shifting to what we were hoping to do before, which is actually beginning to use our words and to say, I want you. I long for you. I'm so desperate for this to work out, but I'm not going to force you to work this out.
I'm not going to chase you.
I'm not going to chase you. I'm going to be here, right here, with my heart in my hands, right? Letting you know, I want you. I want this to work out. This is what I'm willing to do about it, and that's where your personal work comes in, right? This is what I'm willing to do. I want you to say yes, but I'm not going to force you to say yes.
And in many cases, there's the unfaithful that says, okay, I'm in, and they'll engage. There's a lot of cases where they do that, and the unfaithful's like, oh, okay, I'm in, and they're not. They disappear. What does the betrayed do then? Is it just simply, okay, I've got to heal me, I've got to work on me? Is it just focusing on no longer trying to get them to be engaged? I mean, what did they do?
Yes, and absolutely, and that's where the grief comes in. And grief is an important part of this work. Grief also enables us to let go, not just of that other person, but of the behaviors within us. When I think about emotional intelligence, which is what this is, it just gets our IQ way up there. We wouldn't know how to do these things, to relate this way as honestly and as securely, self-securely, without going through a lot of these kinds of traumatic events. So the pain is doing you good, even here.
So this has been riveting. I think so many people deal with codependency and don't know it. And so I think this will be part one And we're going to continue this discussion on maybe understanding more about what do we do, where do we go? Okay, we've admitted that we're codependent. And next time we'll talk about, well, what do you do now?
Great.